Up next, we take you to Houston, Texas for coverage of the Republican gubernatorial primary candidates debate. 4 men are vying for the primary victory, and this marks the first time that all candidates, both Democrat and Republican, have engaged in a televised debate. The debate is moderated by George W. Bush, the president's son, and the program comes to us with the courtesy of KUH-TV in Houston.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the underwriters, the sponsors, and the producers, I welcome you to the 1990 Texas Governor's Debates. I'm George W. Bush, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's debate. Let me first start, though, by thanking the underwriters for tonight's program. The Enron Foundation, NCNB Texas, and Member Service Corporation. I'd also like to thank the sponsors, the Houston Chronicle and the Republican Party of Harris County. Thanks to KUHT, Houston Public Television, this broadcast is being sent across the state of Texas so that all Texans will have a chance to fairly judge the candidates for our highest office. Last night the Democrats had their chance, and it was spirited, and we learned a little something. Tonight I expect we'll see the same. So sit back and relax and watch the Republican contenders for governor face the issues and face you, the voters of Texas, for the next 90 minutes. I now have the pleasure of bringing forth the candidates. First, would you please welcome Clayton Williams. Clayton? Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Next, would you please welcome Kent Hance. Next, would you join me in welcoming Jack Raines. Big Jack, good to see you. And finally, please welcome Tom Luce. Next, let me introduce the panel of journalists that will be helping us tonight. First, Bruce Davidson from the San Antonio Express-News. Bruce has covered politics on every level, from Washington to Austin. Bruce, thank you. Next, Cindy Kennard. Cindy Kennard from Dallas, Texas. She works for WFAA, political reporter, Channel 8 there in Dallas, used to work in Houston. Cindy, welcome. And finally, R.G. Radcliffe joins us from Austin. R.G. covers politics for the Houston Chronicle. He's been in politics for over a decade. Now, tonight's debate will be in 3 sections. The first section consists of questions from our panel of journalists. In this section, each candidate will be asked a question from a journalist and a follow-up question from the journalist. And then the other candidates will be having a chance to offer their rebuttals. In the second section, I will be asking the questions. But these will be questions that have been submitted from the candidates to be asked of their competitors. And in the third section, each candidate will be given a chance to summarize their positions, a summary statement. So now let us begin. The first question will be from Bruce Davidson to Kent Hance. Kent, you'll have 2 minutes to answer.
Mr. Hance, as a Democratic congressman, you voted for federal funding of abortion. Now, as a Republican, you say you want a law prohibiting tax dollars from being used for abortions. You are a clearly ambitious politician in your 4th statewide campaign since 1984. Please take this opportunity to explain to voters why you changed your position on abortion, and if you can, convince them that your decision resulted from more than political expediency.
Well, you know, I think that if you look back at President Reagan, President Bush, they also changed their position. One of the problems that we face in this country on that issue is that I think the masses do not want to confront that issue and look at it. No one believed 17 years ago when that issue first came up in Roe versus Wade that abortion would become a means of birth control and a matter of convenience for so many people. 1.5 million babies having their lives taken each and every year. So I think that it was very easy to look at it and see what was happening and seeing that this should stop. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe under the Webster decision that we can make restrictions. And those restrictions, I think, are very reasonable. The restrictions that I would like to implement, and I want to save as many unborn babies as possible, but the restrictions that I would like to implement would be, number one, would protect the rights of the parents, that teenagers could not be able to get an abortion without the parents' consent. Number two, taxpayers should be protected in that their dollars should not be spent on abortions. Number three, that there should not be gender selection abortions. And number four, that abortion clinics should have the same health and safety standards as any other health clinic.
You have said that you would support a law that would ban abortion in all cases except to save the life of the mother. To put your position into perspective, if Eileen Raines, Modesta Williams, or Pam Luce were raped and impregnated, do you believe they should be forced by law to bear the child of the rapist?
I think that's an outrageous question, Bruce, and it's highly offensive. You know, for you to come in here and pick on the wives of the candidates, our families have a tough enough time. That's a cheap shot. I resent it. I think that it's out of... It is totally out of line, and I'm disappointed. Now, I will say this. If any of our family were assaulted, I, like the other members, would give love and compassion and help those people. The next thing we would do is grab the person that committed the assault by the throat and drag them down to the courthouse and make sure they stay there forever. Last thing I'd say, just because we're in politics, our families aren't fair game, and if you think that you can take those kind of shots at me, if it loses me the election, so be it, but I'm not going to let the press run over me and under those conditions taking shots at me or my family or the other candidate's family.
Jack Raines.
Obviously, there's not any issue that's any more sensitive, any more personal, that cuts any deeper than this issue of abortion. I don't know anyone that doesn't have personal beliefs that are deeply held and that are sincerely held. But as Republicans, we need to remember two things. First, there's far more that unites us than divides us. Kent and I have our differences. But we need to remember that we are standing way separate from the Democrats. But I personally believe that it is not the duty of government to tell people how to make personal decisions. That's why I've said as governor, I'll not support legislation that further restricts the rights of an adult woman to an abortion. And Kent, you may not like the question, but in the event someone close to us were raped, I want us to make that decision and not you in the legislature.
Tom Luce.
Well, I think we've seen by the nature of the question and the answers what a profound personal decision is the abortion question. And I think in this issue it is extremely important that we deal with principles and not politics. I believe it is important that we be consistent in our views, each individual candidate. And I have stated my views consistently, and I have stated the principles that led me to the decision that I made. They were basically that I, although opposed personally to abortion, I believe very strongly that the relevant question in the governor's race is what should the government's role be in that decision. And I believe it should be a very limited role, and we ought to preserve the statutory framework we have today.
Clayton Williams.
It's a very emotional issue to both sides in our party, and I have great respect for the people on both sides, and believe me, I've been hearing a lot from both sides during the campaign, but my position is that except for cases of rape, except in cases of incest, and except when the mother's life is in danger, I'm against abortion. Thank you. And this going one step further, if you please, I have two adopted boys that give me a little bit of an emotional tag to my position. Thank you.
Cindy Kennard, your question to Jack Raines.
Mr. Raines, let's say that you are elected governor. A member of your staff has been diagnosed with AIDS. How would you deal with this? Would you fire the person? If so, why? And if not, how would you deal with this as it relates to other members of the staff?
You know, AIDS is an absolutely terrible epidemic that's sweeping this country. And it's something that no matter how you may personally feel about the lifestyles of the people who contract that disease, if that is an issue, anyone who is terminally ill needs support, compassion. And I would certainly give it to him first as an individual, and as governor, I hope our state would do that. You know, I served as trustee of Baylor College of Medicine, as director of the Texas Medical Center, and on the board of visitors of MD Anderson Hospital. We had to deal with that disease and all of its implications. And I can tell you from that perspective, we face a crisis in health care in this state. And it is a crisis that none of us can escape and we must face up to. What we're doing in Texas today to deal with AIDS is not adequate. We need to address the issue. We need to put emotion aside and understand that it's a question of health problem. Now, first, I think we need to begin with education. That begins in the schools. Young people must understand that it's a threat and how insidious a threat it is. Second, we need to make sure that funding is available to take care of those who are terminally ill. I believe that we have a society that's compassionate, and we always have, and I hope we always will. Finally, we need to make sure that we spur research in those areas. Here at the Texas Medical Center, we have a great deal of research underway. One of the things I've said in my Texas agenda is that I'm going to work with our delegation to see that we receive a fair allocation of federal research funding. We don't today, we should. I think we can find the answer to some of these problems.
You have criticized Mr. Hance for saying those who disagree with a strong pro-life position are the same people who condone alternative lifestyles. You said that the alternative lifestyle remarks showed that Hance is out of touch, Mr. Hance that is out of touch with Texas today. Can we presume then you will work to guarantee fair housing and employment for gay people in Texas?
Well, I think you've overreached. Ken Hance and I had a disagreement when he said that because of the position that I took on the question of abortion, that because I didn't support his call for a virtual total ban on abortion, that people who took that position would favor alternative lifestyles. That's not true in my case personally, nor is it true of the millions of Texans who disagree with Ken Hance on his position. And that was the distinction that I made. Now, I do not support legislation that recognizes sexual preference as some kind of a group that deserves minority protection under civil rights laws or any other laws. I believe that we need to have a government that addresses health concerns, but I don't believe it extends to that legislation that you're referring to.
Tom Luce.
Well, I believe that AIDS is a health issue and not a social issue. And we have a lot of health care issues in this state that we need to focus on. AIDS is one of them. Alzheimer is another. Rural health care is another. And I believe that the way that we can respond to these problems is to build on the leverage that we already have in this state in the way of first-class medical facilities. Jack mentioned the Texas Medical Center here in Houston. That's also true with the Biotechnical Center in San Antonio, which has the potential to be the nation's top-flight research unit in terms of AIDS research. That's true of the University of Texas Health Science Center in Tyler with respect to lung and heart disease. I think we need to build on this base to make Texas a leader in medical research. The spinoff to our citizens will improve their health and create jobs.
AIDS is a growing threat to an expanding population. And while many of us disapprove of the origin and the original lifestyles that were the basic cause, it has now spread into a broader part of the population, heterosexuals, the drug users, and it has so far defied real meaningful results in research vaccinations. Obviously, research is the key. Prevention is the key. I'll be trying to work with projects, carrying them along side by side with research and education on prevention. And I think we have to face it that as this disease spreads and the illnesses are highly expensive, we're going to have to do a better job managing state government to be able to have extra monies available for more efficient government to take care of the many people there. It's a serious problem.
Well, the government is doing more in research and also in education. But I think the thing we have to keep in mind, AIDS is a health issue and a moral issue. It is not a civil rights issue. And we should keep that in mind in trying to address this problem. I think that's very important. One of the things that we're doing nationwide, not only this state but at the federal level, is additional research. And that is important, and I think all of us support research.
Mr. Ratcliffe, your question to Tom Luce.
Mr. Luce, you advocate a program to allow parents to choose which public school their children will attend so they can get the best education possible. Considering school desegregation orders, how will you maintain ethnic balance in schools? How will you keep students in schools in low-income neighborhoods? If public transportation is not provided, how would you keep this from becoming just a program for wealthy children? And how would you keep the best schools in Houston and Dallas from becoming overcrowded as parents from all parts of town try to send their children to the best schools?
Well, I believe that we owe the people of Texas real solutions to the real problems that face us. And one of the toughest problems is education. And educating our citizens, I believe, should be the #1 priority of any Republican administration and will be of mine. And I believe in that regard that our entire economic future really depends upon the ability to educate our citizens. The ability of my children and your children and everybody's children to get jobs depends on education. Now, I know from my experience that we face real problems in Texas in education. We made a start in 1984, a real start in improving our public schools. Test scores are up, dropout rates are down, and we have begun the process. But we have to do more, and we have to do more immediately to improve the situation. That's the reason why I have presented a concrete plan to bring about changes in the classroom. That is the essence of where education takes place. As a result of my work in education, I know we need accountability. And one way you get accountability is with choice. Now, in any choice system, I don't want to build any new schools. And you have to have a system that has a first-in priority system, that has a wait list, but it will be a concrete way to start the process of improving our schools. But we need to do much more than choice. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. We need to give teachers the ability to be the professionals that they want to do. We need to eliminate paperwork of our teachers. We need to give principals the right to hire and fire. We need to do more in education to bring about change in the classroom. We need discipline. We need drug-free schools. And most of all, we need to understand that it is the key to every Texan's future.
Choice, the voucher
Hold
system.
on, excuse me, Craig. Follow up, sorry.
I'm going to,
You just have to wait your turn.
Mr. Luce, that was an interesting speech on education, but the question was, with your program for choice, how do you keep an ethnic balance in these schools? How will you keep students in schools in low-income neighborhoods? How will you keep this program from becoming just a program for the children of the wealthy? And how do you keep the best schools in the large cities from becoming overcrowded?
Well, what you do is you interject into the system accountability so that we improve all of our schools. Now, where we have court orders, obviously you cannot violate a court order. But you know, I believe today, that one of the problems in the school system is lack of accountability. We are Republicans. We understand competition. We understand accountability. And we know and believe that when you bring accountability into the system, you will improve education for everyone. And that is the object of choice, is to do exactly that. And you regulate that in terms of how many students can move. But let me say this, if all of a sudden a school becomes empty, somebody will get the message that something ought to be done to improve that school.
Makes a lot of sense, choice. The voucher approach has some merit in that connection, where all the children have a voucher for the same funds to go to the different schools. I think that the voucher system may very well handle that particular problem. Let me point out another problem that would be a barrier in the way to a very worthy project, and that is a marketer. Let's take you have two schools. One has a very suave principal who's a good marketer, good salesman. The other has a stodgy old principal who's somewhat old-fashioned. And so the fellow that's the best marketer would draw all the kids to his school. You might find out some 4 years later that the other school was just as well. He wasn't as good a salesman. And I think that is another thing we'll have to be very concerned about. But the voucher system has real merit, and we've seen where private schools have been able to do a much more cost-effective job than some of the public schools. It's a worthy objective, I think.
The problem, RG, is your question. It assumes that that one school is going to be the only one that's any good, and that there's not going to be additional competition from the schools that that people are choosing to go away from. Well, I think it creates competition. I think the problem will solve itself, because as one school starts getting additional students, the other schools are going to improve. That's the reason in education I support public schools and I support the choice program. I also support private schools, parochial schools, and home schools. This country needs more competition in education, and this is a step in the right direction that President Bush approves of.
Well, your question about choice and how you maintain ratios runs to the heart of a great debate that we need to have in this country. Because I submit choice works in other states, we need to make it work here. And the focus should be on the quality of the education and not on ratios. For too long, we've done all the wrong things for all the right reasons. And the children of Texas have paid the price. Our schools have slid into mediocrity. And Tom, I disagree. You know, they've changed. The same people keeping the numbers at TEA did body counts at the Pentagon during the Vietnam War. Test scores are not up. Dropout rates are up. You know, it was a great beginning. We all supported it. But the first stage of solving the problem is getting past denial. We have a problem in education today. Teachers know it. My mother's a teacher. She was. My daughter's a teacher. Talk to teachers. They'll tell you we're in crisis. Administrators, school board members. We need to begin to start over.
Mr. Davidson, your question to Clayton Williams.
Mr. Williams, you have said you will veto any state mandate that forces a property tax increase for school districts. Yet in your war on drugs plan, you have offered a number of proposals, such as more jail time for drug possession and increased bail requirements for drug and violent crime offenders. Those proposals could force already overburdened counties to raise new property tax revenues to pay the bill. How do you reconcile the difference in your approach to property taxpayers on education and crime?
Well, my vetoes were mandates to the schools, to the county government. I want to double the prison. Today, the average criminal is serving 1 day out of 6. I'm an old-fashioned fellow. I think a 10-year sentence should still mean 10 years. Double the prison. And I want to pay for those prisons and for my entire 25-point plan to win the war on drugs with 6 specific cuts and efficiencies in the state government. I want to freeze the state hiring. The state has added over 3,200 net employees. Every year for the last 10 years, we added 5,200 in the month of October. I want a 7% cut in state operating expenses, Tom, operating. And I exclude, it's my turn, when I say operating expenses, I don't mean programs, I don't mean salaries. I mean turn off the air conditioner when you go home at 5, and I exclude education, criminal justice, and health care from that. I want to repeal the prevailing wage. I want a 10% cut in state automobiles. I want to sell the 75 state print shops and the 61 state airplanes and bid both that work, airplane travel and printing, to the private sector, just like we do the highways. The private sector can do it. And if you want to see a circus someday, go to Austin, to the airplane hangar on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock and just watch. Politicians and bureaucrats driving up in our automobiles, loading into our airplanes, spreading all over the state of Texas, spreading their, whatever it is they spread on us when they fly.
Mr. Williams,
Follow-up question.
most urban county jails are already overcrowded, and if you eliminate bail or restrict bail for criminals, it'll just enhance the problem. How do you expect to help counties foot that bill?
I expect to help the counties by doubling the prison. I'm talking about 20,000 young men and women to boot camps every year, 5,000 camp capacity 4 times a year. I want 20,000 intermediate capacity, much like Jack suggested, on using abandoned military bases, and I want 20,000 hardcore prisons. The state has let down the counties all over by the act of not building the prison, by not meeting their responsibility. They have abdicated their responsibility, and thus the counties and the cities have been forced to pick up the slack. That's just an example of the archaic form of government that we have in Austin today. And any Republican down there is going to do a whale of a lot better job than the Democratic legislature that we've had. I hope to lead the fight to elect some Republican men and women across the board.
Mr. Hance.
Well, I'm amazed at Mr. Williams' answer. You know, he was really getting tough there. He's going to cut off the air conditioners at 5 o'clock, and I'm all for that, Clady. I do think, though, that there is an issue here that is more important. You know, I read the Dallas Morning News yesterday about your Busting Rock program, and I've seen a lot of it on TV. Everybody has. And I'm all for everyone busting rock, but you're going to pay them the minimum wage, Clady. And the minimum wage, if you take the number of prisoners in the state, it's only going to cost the state $1 billion every 2 years for you paying them the minimum wage. Why are you going to pay prisoners to bust rock? Now, they may be breaking into prison under your plan, trying to get a job. I got more to say. Don't be clapping. I'm not through. I am through. That's my time.
I'll finish it up.
Jack Lynch.
Well, the real issue here is how we deal with the burgeoning prison population and allocate resources. As part of the Clements administration, we fought and put $1 billion into prison because the prior administration did not propose a single cell or sign one into law. So we had to play catch up. I don't like to invest money in prisons, but I like it lots better than having dangerous people on the streets, and that's the only alternative. So we've got to build them. But I want to see us devote money to minimum security facilities for first offenders that are nonviolent. And let's deal with the root causes of crime, functional illiteracy and substance abuse. I'm tired of having them go through a revolving door. Unless we begin to deal with root causes, we're not going to cut into the rate of recidivism. That's where it begins. We need to look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin has one of the highest graduation rates of any state in this country and one of the lowest rates of incarceration per thousand. We have one of the highest dropout rates and one of the highest rates of inmates. Now, we can learn something from that. It's time we started getting smart.
You know, Clady, when I called your hand on that 7% across the board yesterday, you replied by saying I didn't understand, that really what you were going to cut was paper clips and copy machines, and you were going to raise the thermostats, and that was going to save $1.5 billion. Now, Clady, I suggest you need to go back to math, because there is no way that that's going to save $1.5 billion. And that's what I call the old politics. And this isn't 1890, and slogans won't get it done, and gimmicks won't get it done. We're going to have real solutions to these problems, Clady, and I don't think we can ride horseback into the space age.
Cindy Kennard, your question to Ken Hance.
Mr. Hance, in your 1984 race, that is the Democratic race for the U.S. Senate, you boosted yourself into a runoff with a series of TV ads on immigration. And the ads were decried by the Hispanic community as being racist in tone. In this race, you've made an issue of promoting English as the official language of Texas, and this is a state, of course, with a vast population of people who speak Spanish, some as the only language. My question is, why is it that Hispanics are frequently a target of your campaign, and why should minorities feel that their interests would be protected if you're the governor of the state of Texas?
First of all, let me tell you, any time that we put a youngster in a position that he cannot or she cannot speak English, we're putting them at a great disadvantage. I support English being the official language of this state. I'm the only candidate up here that does. 90%, over 90% of the people that vote in the Republican primary approve that in a referendum. That is meant to be something that will be helpful in helping youngsters get jobs. They need to learn to speak English as quickly as possible. You know, as far as 1984, that campaign was against what I talked about on the issue, was that illegal aliens should not be granted amnesty for breaking the law. I mean, is that an outrageous proposal? You know, I'm amazed. I'm amazed that anyone can, you know, be against that. I mean, I just didn't feel like you should give citizenship to someone that broke the law. We have procedures to go through in this country, and I think that the position I took was the right position. I will be very aggressive in recruiting more Hispanics into the Republican Party. That's a future for us. They are conservative. You know, last election year, 1988, I campaigned for Tony Garza, who ran for county judge down in the valley, and he won. You know, we need to recruit more Hispanics to run and make sure that they're running within the Republican Party. Their values are our values. This will be a good group for us, and I will be very aggressive in getting more involved, the Hispanic community more involved within the Republican Party.
Well, with that in mind, how many... Well, with that in mind, then, how many Afro-Americans and Hispanics, particularly Hispanics, since you alluded to them, do you have working on your campaign in paid positions?
I don't know exact number. We do have some, and I would say this, we have our announcement of our Hispanic Steering Committee coming out next week, and you will see that. You know, I don't go around making decisions saying, I've got to have so many, you know, of this color and so many of this color and so many of this color. I make decisions on the people that apply and who's best qualified, and I think that's the way it should be.
Jack.
Well, the question raises two fundamental questions. First, on the question of proficiency in English. Everyone on this stage and every leader in Texas, Hispanic or whatever, believes and knows that English is the international language of commerce, and for a child in this state to fully develop and participate in our society must be proficient in English. Consequently, the goal of our educational system is to move children mainstream into English as quickly as possible. We all support that. But the other question, this official English. When I read that ballot referendum, Kent, you know, it looked good to me. I didn't think it through. I lacked a sensitivity, because every Hispanic Republican I've talked to said, Jack, don't support that because it sends the wrong message to Hispanics. You know, we have to get elected, and 30% of our majority comes from getting 30% of the Hispanic vote. You can't get it when you send that message. President Bush opposes it, Senator Graham opposes it, and the other three of us oppose it. There's a clear message for you there.
I feel very strongly we all want the same thing. We all want a first-rate education. We want opportunities. I believe to be a productive citizen, we need to teach all of our children to be proficient in English. Today, we have a school finance system that gives incentives to schools to not graduate a child from bilingual education. I think that's wrong. I think we need to educate every American to be proficient in English, to be able to hold jobs and keep jobs.
Clayton Williams.
No question that any Hispanic child or from any other region of the world, that if you don't speak English and don't speak it fluently, you're going to be handicapped. What we're talking about is how's the best way to get there. I oppose official English because it is perceived as to be racist by many of my Mexican-American friends. English only is cloudy. I think the best way to go is transitional English. And in the judgment of the local principal, given 2 or 3 or 4 years, a period of time for young children who speak Spanish, only some transitional period to learn English. Now, I have 2 experiences. I had a friend of mine, Pilo Perales, that had 4 kids. He was speaking Spanish in the home. I encouraged him, Pilo, don't do that. Speak English. And he did, and they graduated from college. Another friend of mine, Frank Velasco, his daughter was valedictorian, Fort Stockton High School. She graduated and didn't speak Spanish. So we're looking for a balance between where the people all over the world can retain their culture, but English must be the primary language.
Mr. Radcliffe, your question to Jack Raines.
Mr. Raines, you have raised ethics questions about Mr. Hance taking campaign contributions from people who have business before the Railroad Commission. But consider this. One Houston man gave Governor Bill Clements $43,000 in 1986 for his campaign that year. That man got an appointment to the University of Texas Board of Regents, and his company got $2 million in state business that it did not have before. That same man has given your campaign $32,000 so far this year. How do we know your decisions in office will not be influenced by campaign contributions?
When you raise the question of campaign finance and ethics in government, my record on that is very clear. As a private businessman, I appeared in Austin and campaigned for campaign finance reforms and ethics reforms. As Secretary of State in the 70th and 71st legislature, I led that fight again, as you well know. I have been very clear in what I advocate and what I believe in, and that's that I think $5,000 is the most any individual should give a campaign, $10,000 by PAC, and $25,000 would be the most that any individual could do in political activity in a year. Now, that's what I believe. But I also don't believe in unilateral disarmament. When I'm confronted by a man with great personal wealth, and Clady, I think you've got a right to spend it all, and I'm going to try to help you. And Kent is using his office and using it well, and the reason I asked him to resign, and we talked about it in advance. Let me make this clear. I don't think Kent's a dishonest man. I don't think he's a cheat or anything like that. There's a question here that we're dealing with. I know what Jim Maddox does. That's pretty clear. I don't think he could win an election of his contributors, but
Good lie. Good lie.
And the point I wanted to make, the reason I called on Kent to do that, is we're a party that's different. We stand for something. And I think you do it by doing that. But RG, I accepted the money because under the circumstances, if you don't get money, you get out-shouted. And I'm behind right now because I'm getting out-bought on television.
Well, two things. Would you, do you feel like campaign contributions of this size will influence you in office? And then also you mentioned Mr. Williams' money. Mr. Williams has been loaning his money to the campaigns so that he can get contributions later to repay him personally should he win. If candidates are going to put this much of their own personal money in there, should they have to just put it in with no hope of getting it back?
Well, in the campaign finance reforms that we put up, that was one of the suggestions that I had in committee that didn't make it out of our bipartisan committee that was proposed as legislation. I also wanted some strengthening the disclosure laws. We have the way we move money around this state, we make a gesture towards disclosure, not much more. The only other people who move money as much as politicians in Texas are in Columbia, and we know what business they're in. Yeah. So it's insidious. What we have in Austin is an odor that comes from special interest money influence. Now, we're all forced into a system. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I like it because I've fought against it. And as governor, I'll make ethics and campaign finance reform a priority. People of Texas deserve to know who's paying the bill and who's looking for what. And if they're going to do it, I'm going to make sure they do it in a lighted room and we all know about it.
Tom Luce. I believe very strongly the Republican Party is going to be the majority party in Texas in 1990. And I believe as the new majority party, we have to set a new ethical standard. And I don't think you can have excellence in government until you have integrity in government. That's why I have proposed a sweeping ethics package that would include banning conflict of interest contributions. For instance, Jack referred to Jim Maddox. I think it's awful that Jim Maddox gets contributions from people he's suing. And I think we ought to ban conflict of interest contributions. I think that we ought to have judges banned from accepting contributions from lawyers. And I believe that we should make sure that we reform the system in Austin when we take over.
No question. I think the highlight is contributions from practicing attorneys to a judge who has venue in your cases. And there's some cases where big dollars have passed in that, and that is a direct conflict of interest. And in years past, the legal profession did a little better job of policing that than they've been able to do lately. It seemed like some of the major problems that come about in our state come from that small group of liberal, selfish plaintiff trial lawyers that make these major contributions. I'd like to see it limited and severely limited in that case.
Mr. Hance.
Well, I'm kind of lost for words on Mr. Williams' answer on that. He talks about those liberal plaintiff lawyers in the Texas Senate, and yet you gave to Craig Washington, you gave to Eddie Bernice Johnson. Out of the 17 most liberal members of the Texas Senate, you've given money to 14 of the 17. And so, you know, I mean, you've got a problem there, lady. One other proposal that one other thing I'd like to see passed, and also didn't want you to think I'd forgotten about the money you gave Ann Richards and Jim Maddox. Had to bring that up. I just didn't want that to slide by. I'm not
We got
forgetful.
15 seconds left. Keep going.
Well, it'd take me, let me tell you, it'd take me the rest of the night to list all the liberal Democrats you've been giving money to, but the proposal I'd like to see is that a candidate couldn't spend more than $100 million in his own campaign, and that'd cut you down.
Mr. Davidson, your question to Tom Luce.
Mr. Luce, you have frequently noted that you served on the War on Drugs Commission during Governor Clement's first campaign. You played a role in passing a series of laws designed to crack down on drug abuse, but clearly drug abuse has gotten worse. Why should voters now believe that the Get Tough drug laws you're proposing will be any more effective?
Well, I think we have a window of opportunity now in Texas to really wage that war on drugs. When we started the War on Drugs Commission in 1979, our principal function was to educate the people of Texas to the fact we had a drug problem. In the early 80s, that was when I think Texas was going through what I call the deniability phase. That is to say, school principals said, well, no, gosh, they're not in our schools. They may be across town or they may be in Detroit, but we don't have them in our schools. And that's when mayors of cities said the same thing. Now today, everybody knows that we have a drug problem, and I think they're prepared to pass a comprehensive drug program. And in my mind, a comprehensive drug program includes swift and sure justice, which means that we will put violent criminals in jail and keep them there. And the crime problem is directly related to drugs. 85% of the inmates in Huntsville are there on an alcohol or drug-related offense. So I think the people will support changes that will be tough, but they also know that we need to do more, that we need to deal with drug treatment, drug prevention, and drug education. That War on Drugs Commission that you referred to is supposed to be the frontline troops in Texas on drug prevention. And the legislature in the last session allocated $800,000 a year to drug education through the War on Drugs Commission. Now, drug dealers spend that much money hourly or daily, and yet that's what we're doing through the War on Drugs Commission. I think we need to do more in terms of prevention, education, and treatment, as well as being as tough as we can possibly be on drug dealers, and we must have zero tolerance of drug use in this state.
Do you believe Texas can win the war on drugs without raising taxes? And if you do, where will we get the money to fund the new programs that are needed?
Well, our last biennium budget in the state went up $9 billion in a down economy. No tax increase, went up $9 billion. Tax collections across the state are up now, where I think that we will probably even have more new revenue next biennium. I believe there is enough money to win the war on drugs if we will prioritize our spending, and number two, the people of this state send a very clear message across the state that we must have zero tolerance. I think if you have a person that does drugs, you know, my motto is, if you do drugs, you do time in Texas. And the first offense ought to be drug treatment, education, rehabilitation. We need to intervene early in the process and get the person off drugs before they're headed to Huntsville.
Well, for a solid 25-point program to win the war on drugs, I said earlier tonight how I want to pay for it, with six specifics, well-researched, $1.6 billion in cuts and efficiencies in the state government. I've outlined that. I'm talking about beefing up law enforcement substantially, real penalties on the users, doubling the prisons, boot camps to send 20,000 a year to save them from becoming criminals, and make rocks into parks and barbecue pits and campsites. And $127 million to apply to at-risk children, $50 million to help young children stay in private programs to help those families that don't have the money. I've come at it from every direction. It's solid, it's real. It's largely come from Bill Crement's Task Force on Criminal Justice. I'm the only candidate that specifically said 25 points I want to do it, and 6 specific points which I identified I'll pay for it. And Tom, you were asked yesterday 7 times at your press conference specifically what you would like to cut, and you never answered it.
I would be delighted to debate that subject with you.
Yeah.
Ken Hance.
I was enjoying listening to him. One of the things that I think is amusing, Mr. Williams talks about, he can finance it through cuts and everything. On September the 12th, he said that he might have to have an income tax to be able to finance his drug program to fight drugs. I guess he thought that an income tax would cut down on the use of drugs. If that were true, Mr. Williams, there would be no drugs used in New York City or in the state of New York. They would completely have eliminated them. I think that you have to look at education. The DARE program has been very successful. That on possession, I think that people that possess drugs, that they have to have some type of jail time, even if it's very small, even if it's 3 days, so they'll know that if they sell or continue to be involved in drugs, they may have a lifetime. And I also call for the death penalty in drug sale cases where murder is involved. That's the way that we can have a successful program in trying to stem the tide on drugs.
When I announced for governor, I said the only way we'll win this drug war is when we go to zero tolerance as a society. Now that means if we're in a war, we're going to have to get serious. And I'll lead that war. I don't like government intrusion in our lives, but I said I'd submit to drug testing. I'll see that my staff does. I'll take it to every corporation and every group in this state, because until we control demand, we'll never choke off supply. We can't keep drugs out of maximum security prisons, so we have no chance of keeping them out of Texas, our schools, or your home. You know, this problem has touched probably every family in Texas. I know from personal experience the tragedy that it brings. If we really believe that drugs are that kind of a threat, then it's time for us to stand together as a people and say we're going to do something about it. And that means drying up that demand. I'm prepared to do it, and I think with right leadership, we can put together a majority of Texans. We can do something about this problem. I want to get after it.
Ms. Kennard, your final question to Clayton Williams.
Mr. Williams, you are a graduate of A&M, a member of the Corps, I think, at one time, or I know at one time, and the university prides itself on instituting character. You acknowledge living the life of a roughneck. Your drinking and fist fighting has been widely reported. It's also been reported that your son has had a drug problem at one time. You preach against drugs. You make a big deal about your son and wanting to help him. You want to take harsh measures against teenagers for abusing drugs, but then you boast of fist fighting and that you use the drug alcohol. What kind of role model are you?
Well, I don't claim to be a perfect man, but I've been a good father. I've raised 5 kids. Yes, my boy did get involved in drugs, and we pitched in as a family, worked. Modesta and I spent 14 months with our boy in a program in Richardson called Straight. Straight's tied to belief in a higher power, 12 steps for recovery, strong family support, and the knowledge that kids get kids on drugs. You can use kids to get off drugs. Our younger kids, my son's younger brother and younger sister joined us in that program. And we learned and lived the pain of drugs as a family. I do enjoy a couple of beers. It's never interfered with my family life, never interfered with my business or in the pursuit of a good life. But I'm not going to tell you I don't enjoy a beer. I've never taken a legal drug of any sort. I don't think I'd know what marijuana smelled like if I tried it. The fist fight, you're dang right I'll fight. Probably a good chance to explain that. There was a former employee of mine, I won't call his name, that that had become an alcoholic. Alcoholism has cost our company, like many people, and I fired him. He started drinking all day long, and he was an excellent geologist. And he continued to come back around our offices, harassing my employees. He came in the office one day, and I decked him. And I'd do it again. It apparently was a pretty good management tool because he's never been back.
Your follow-up question.
I just hope you don't deck me for the next question.
See, if you look at me, I'm really not that much of a threat. I was an athlete in high school. I played fullback, and they said about the Fort Stockton Panthers, they're small, but boy, are they slow. Our record was 5-5. We lost 5 at home, lost 5 on the road.
That's it.
She gives a follow-up.
That was a great answer to a non-question. Mr. Hance.
That's one way to keep you from asking that second question, just keep talking. Mr. Williams is a funny guy, and I love a lot of his stories and a lot of his jokes, but I have not been in a fist fight since I was, I guess, 12 or 13, and that doesn't mean that I'm not a man, or any of the rest of us. I will not get in a fist fight as governor. You know, when you were a little kid, I mean, my mother kept telling me, now don't get into fights, don't get into fights. You need to settle your disagreements with your mind. And that's something you need to do. You need to be able to settle your disagreements with your mind. I think the amazing thing, you know, there's not too many people, Mr. Williams has been in 3 fist fights in the last 6 years, and I think it's a real small group that's running for governor.
Jack Raines.
Well, the thrust of the question ran to what kind of a role model Clayton Williams is. Let me talk to that.